What is RSD and how can you cope with it if you experience this? Say you've sent a text message to somebody and there's a delay in response, and your feelings may be ones of you may have offended them, they may not like you anymore, you may have done something wrong. And those feelings can be really intense physically as well as emotionally. And in this episode, we explore where those feelings come from and what you can do about it to help cope better. And today's guest has actually done research on this topic, and the whole episode is peppered through with ideas and other resources, which of course you will see in the show notes and on eventhedoghasadhd.com. So without further ado, let's dive in. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to have friend and colleague Stella Bell to talk about and explore rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And Stella has so kindly agreed to come on, and she's done a really important piece of research on rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And what better person to have here today? Welcome, Stella.
Wow, thank you, Diana. Welcome to you too, into your studio. Um, what a generous welcome. It's lovely to be here.
Oh no, I'm so thrilled. And we have done the typical neurodivergent thing and talked till the cows come home, exploring all sorts of things that we think would be really interesting topics to explore a bit deeper in terms of different sensitivities that we often have as neurodivergent individuals. Now, when we were exploring recording this episode, the initial thing that would be really interesting to explore is the fact that you said there is already quite a bit of research on rejection sensitivity, but the dysphoria piece, which is not in the DSM, and if we explain what the DSM, I'll let you explain that. The dysphoria bit isn't included. And let's start there. What is rejection sensitivity? And then what is rejection sensitivity dysphoria?
Okay, so really, what I want to get across to people is that rejection sensitivity or rejection sensitive dysphoria, which is what most ADHD folk recognise the term, it's a threat response. Basically, a threat response, not a character flaw. This is your nervous system doing its very best to keep you safe in relationships, even if the way it goes about it is a bit extreme.
Yeah.
So I mostly use the term rejection sensitivity or sensitivity to rejection, because the dysphoria element was added by a doctor called he's a psychiatrist. He's really well known in ADHD circles. People know him, they'll have seen videos by him. And he's added dysphoria to this description of angrily and constantly expecting rejection. And so it's expecting rejection and then angrily reacting to it, basically. And he added the dysphoria because he heard from his practice, because he's a psychiatrist and he talks to lots of people with ADHD, he heard from his practice that sometimes this experience was really painful. People talk about a gut punch or a pain in the chest or something like that when they feel that sense of being rejected. And it's really interesting because he said because it's painful, it's unique to ADHD. It's not. It's cross diagnostic, so it's across lots and lots of mental health conditions. It's dysphoria means unbearable in ancient Greek, and effectively it's because of that pain element that he added the dysphoria. And not everybody experiences it in a painful way, but what the research suggests is that the reason why we feel it as painful is because the areas of the brain that are connected with rejection and pain are really close together, and so actually do feel it as a pain. And there's a really, really good reason, because if we go back to back to ourselves as as human beings, as mammals, being part of a community is the most important thing. We come out completely dependent. So when we're born, we are completely dependent on others around us. And so we really, really need that connection. And if there is any break in that connection, it's life-threatening. And so effectively, if you have been taught through your system when you're a child to believe that you're not going to get your needs met when you reach out for them, it feels like to you that connection has been broken and it feels life-threatening. And so what happens is you jump into a threat response. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute.
Who is this psychologist? The work you said he's quite well known in?
He's a psychiatrist. His name is William Dodson, and he's an American psychiatrist, and he's done a lot of research and work into ADHD. He treats ADHD patients. And in fact, he stated that he wasn't able to get funding for a lot of his research, but actually at the same time that he was making these statements, there was loads of research going on into rejection and rejection sensitivity and sensitivity to rejection. It's been recognizing it as a condition for years and years and years. I read some work that was written about it in 1928. I mean, this is not new. Yeah, but what he wasn't doing was drawing on this body of work, which is all around attachment related rejection. He was doing loads of work particularly under a woman called Downey. I can't remember her first name. She called Josephine Downey. Can't remember. Anyway, you will find if you do a search for rejection sensitivity and this woman Downey's name, since the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, all the way through to today, she is still being a significant named author on a lot of work into this.
How do you? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Carry on.
Downey. Downey.
Yeah.
So basically, our bodies learn about rejection very early on from the families and the environments we grow up in. And it doesn't have to mean a horrific abuse. It can be more ordinary and subtle. So, for example, a big family, stretched adults, if you're one of several children and everyone's tired and juggling things and nobody's deliberately rejecting you, but your tiny baby body, which hasn't developed logic, still gets the message that I need to be easy or invisible to keep the peace, or I need to shout and rage in order to get attention, right? So a big family might be an issue because you're not getting the connection when you need it. Then there's sort of the chaotic neurodivergent household, and this is where ADHD comes into. If your parents have ADHD or other neurodivergencies and the home is noisy, unpredictable, full of shouting, last minute panics, your body may not feel consistently safe. So even if there's love there, you're not getting that message. It's like a somatic message. When you're a baby, you don't have intellect. All you have is whether you're picked up and comforted when you need it, whether you feel safe. So it's all about a sense of safety. If you can keep that in mind, when you're having this response, you are moving into a place where your body doesn't think you're safe. So, added to that, if we think about that, the whole emotional misattunement, ADHD often brings high levels of emotionality. And you can hear in my voice there are high levels of emotionality. So, there you go. Maybe when you were upset or you were teased or told not to make a fuss, or you were just sent to your room, again, nobody's necessarily trying to harm you, but the message you absorb is that my feelings are too much. Or when I reach out, no one really comes. So what I really want to emphasize here, because when I read it, I read the rejection, the attachment related stuff, it sounded like they were blaming the parents. This isn't about parent bashing. Parents are doing the best that they can with the nervous systems and the histories they've got. And if they're neurodivergent and they're struggling, of course there's going to be it's going to be more disruptive to the child, isn't it? So I'm not interested in blaming people for this, because it's not a blame thing. It's I'm more interested in your body's learnt experience and what that means and how we can manage it as a result of understanding that that's what's happening.
And it's really interesting what you were saying about creating safety. And I can't remember where I read it, that children require safety over love. Like the sense of safety creates the space to be able to receive and give love, which I found really interesting. And what does that mean?
That is interesting. It's not something that I've heard, but I I mean, we could then question, what is love? Is love a sense of safety anyway?
Yeah.
And that belief that actually we're going to be accepted for who we are, and not, we'll just be accepted as we are. And what is love if it's not that?
Beautiful. Exactly.
So it's worth understanding that essentially inside us we build a template. They call it a schema in the psychological world, but it's over time experiences build this sort of inner template, a gut level story about you and other people and how you interact. So if as a child there was enough repair and enough messages of you matter in early life, you basically get an I'm okay and people are mostly safe. But if things are chaotic, critical, or emotionally thin, the story might be closer to people leave, or I'm too much, or I'm only safe if I get things exactly right. Which is one that a lot of people will recognize in themselves, where they've had parents who are doing this totally out of love because they want you to achieve. But to you, that message is I'm wrong rather than the thing that I've just said is wrong.
So you've touched on what it is. So RSD is that feeling of rejection, but it's not just that, because rejection sensitivity has been researched and there's a lot of link around attachment. But the dysphoria piece with William Dodson is the element where we're acknowledging the physiological and psychological pain to it. And you talked about anger, and I know that we've explored the anger doesn't necessarily always go out. It can be going in, and that's what people often refer to as that inner critic. And almost what's the visually coming to mind is, say, somebody sharing their latest interesting topic, and it's not relevant to the conversation. They're suddenly realizing it's mid-flow. They'll stop and like, okay, I need to re-collaborate. I've gone off piste here. But that can then tip into a self, why did I do that? I should have done this. I should have done that, to an extreme. It's not just a bit of self-reflection. It's that anger turned in on the self, which is even more painful.
Yeah. So what's interesting, you talk about externalizing things and internalizing things, which are terms that they use in the psychological space. So if you think of this as a threat response, basically, when you sense any form of rejection, what you're effectively doing is seeing that you're under threat. If you view it as that, think about what the threat you know there's a lot in the psychological research, but if you think about what you know about fight, flight, freeze, people will have heard about fight, flight, freeze when you're under threat. Actually, it's more complex than that, and there are 5 Fs.
What are the 5 Fs? What are the 5 Fs?
So you've got fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and this one's a bit controversial, but they've also introduced a word called flop. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So from the body's perspective, social rejection has always been dangerous. If the group dropped you in the savannah, you wouldn't survive, right? So the nervous system doesn't treat rejection as a mild inconvenience; it treats it like a threat. So you're gonna shift into the threat response that your body has generally taken, And that will depend on your experience as a child. You know, we were saying earlier, it might be that your response is, if I keep quiet, everything will be fine. It might be that you're in a noisy environment and actually you have to shout to be heard.
Yeah.
So the fight would be, with some people it's explosive. And in fact, my research suggested this, and I asked people, interestingly, for their metaphor, and for rejection sensitivity, and there were two really, really clear types. There was this kind of explosive animal fire kind of thing, and then other people came up with this sort of circulating, sucking them down, drawing them in, internalizing. So there's these two types that people talked about. So fighting, you argue, defend, you pick apart the other person's behavior, you explode outwardly. Then there's the flight, where you kind of, which literally on the savannah would be running away, but it could be disappearing, quitting, blocking, ghosting. It could be that you just like emotionally withdraw, which you will be very familiar with if you have maybe an autistic child who once they get over threatened, they'll retreat into themselves and they won't respond at all. And then there's the freeze, so going blank, losing all your words, effectively a form of shutdown. And then the fawn is kind of like we talked about before, this peacemaker, smoothing everything over, apologizing for existing, overdoing care for others. Important. The flop one's important. So if you think about if we think about this as animalistic responses, just your most basic system responding. If you think about a cat catches a mouse, sometimes the mouse just looks like it's dead. It's playing dead. That mouse isn't choosing to do that. It doesn't have the intellect to think, right, okay, this cat's got me, I'm going to pretend that I'm dead. And then when it's, it's a triggered response. So it plays dead so that it can run away. And if you think about it with ADHD, that's that not hyperactivity, but hypo, which is the opposite, where you just go, oh, I can't do anything, can't be bothered, I can't lift myself out of it. And this, I think, because flop is not as big in that kind of in the literature around fight, flight, freeze, I think it gets missed a lot. And I think it's really important, particularly for people with ADHD or autism, to recognize that flop response and find ways to lift themselves out of it, because physically and emotionally and everything is just drained out of you and you just can't function. So if you view your rejection sensitivity as that, then you can see that you have adopted along the way different responses, and it may be that you have more than one. One of the people that I spoke to in the research sometimes has the explosive and sometimes has the internal rumination. And if you look at internalizing and externalizing, people who externalize things tend less to have, they say that as they get older, people are less likely to develop anxiety disorders and depression, because they're getting it out of their system rather than internalizing it and keeping the messaging going and going and going.
So the flop response, I think, is really important and really interesting, because people will talk about ADHD burnout, but burnout can go literally on for years, months. But the flop response that you're mentioning is that cognitive overload, like the speed, the volume. I think there's an element of that goes on with it. Like, what is the difference between a burnout where you're physically and mentally, your body just won't let you go any further, and it's enforced rest, and that looks really similar with this flop. And then where does executive dysfunction sit within all of that?
So it's really interesting, because with threat, when you go into a threat response, your cognitive function shuts down. So you cannot think logically. And when we come on to things that you can do to support yourself, we'll talk about that, because it's really important that you understand that when you get into this state, your cognitive function is reduced, and so you can't actually make sensible decisions. So when you feel like, when you think you're making logical decisions when you've had a rejection episode, it's very unlikely that you are. And I remember one time when I was doing my master's dissertation, I asked for an extension, and my partner is an academic, and I asked for an extension, and I got a response back saying, and I just wrote a bit of, like verbiage about it. I was like saying, oh, I've got ADHD and I only got my meds in May and I really need this because I've only just started to be able to read and blah, 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 and all of this kind of stuff. And they wrote back and they said, we feel really, really sad for you. And we recognize that this is a really big thing. But we can't give you an extension unless you provide us with a doctor's note. I saw that instantly as a rejection. Instantly, I thought, they don't want me, I'm not going to be able to do it anyway. So that put me on hyper alert already. And then what happened was I wrote to the doctor sent me a doctor's note instantly, like straight back, and it said, please give her an extension of 2 weeks. So I uploaded it, but I was told, uploaded it into the system to get the extenuating circumstances to allow me to have this extension. And it said, okay, thank you, we will make a decision by this date. And the date that they were going to make the decision by was after the deadline, right? So I wouldn't know whether they'd accepted my decision, they'd accepted my extenuating circumstances and were giving me an extension until after the research was due in. And I was talking to my partner and he said, I sit on the extenuating circumstances committee. If you've got a doctor's note, they cannot reject you, because they don't have the expertise to know better than the doctors, and the doctors have provided them with that information. He talked to me and talked to me and talked to me, and nothing would calm my nervous system, because my cognitive function had gone offline. All I could think was, I'm going to be rejected, I'm going to fail, I'm not good enough, I'm going to be rejected, they're not going to give me this extension. I could not think beyond that. And then what happens, I'd love to bring this in a bit later, but what happens then is that if you are in a position, what happens is when you've had a rejection or lots of little micro rejections, your nervous system is then on hyper alert. So it's expecting rejection, which is why people with rejection sensitivity anticipate and expect rejection as well as reacting to it, because their nervous system's on hyper alert, so they're looking around everywhere. Where's the rejection? It's coming, I know it's coming. And when it comes, they're like this, so they go like that when it comes, right? So it totally makes sense, right? You're already waiting for it to happen.
So the thing that I personally struggle with is the word dysphoria, like that it's an extreme response, when actually we're talking about evidence. You've got evidence in your brain of rejection, and we're talking about creating safety. So whilst to somebody else that might seem an extreme response to something, like your partner was saying, they've got the logic there, your lived experience and your evidence, you've got evidence historically of when things escalate to the point where
so it's really interesting, because you say it's evidence, but what it is actually your nervous system. Your nervous system has evidence.
Yeah.
So your nervous system has built this sense that whatever I do, I'm going to be rejected.
Yeah.
Right? So it just anticipates rejection. So all the logical stuff that we say is simply trying to explain this sense, this felt sense that rejection is everywhere.
Yeah.
So when you get into that state, your brain is just finding examples. And you know what? The first time I realized I had a rejection sensitivity was I read about it. And because I've got ADHD, I have a really, really poor working memory. And so I really frequently forget stuff. So people go, oh, can you give me an example when you were a child? It's really difficult for me to have an example when I was a child or when I was younger, because because I don't offer, apart from anything, my system, thankfully, has a self-protective mechanism, and I often forget negative stuff. Not always, obviously, because I I experience stuff, but like the ruminating stuff. But the thing that I really remember, because it was a repeated pattern, was when I was premenstrual. And when I was premenstrual, a week premenstrual, regularly, I say when because I'm now perimenopausal. But when I was premenstrual, I would regularly go into a spiral of, I haven't heard from so and so. They don't like me anymore. Oh, and so too. Oh my God. And what did I say to them? I must have offended. Oh my God. Everybody hates me. No. And then I would say to myself, logically, go into the argument. No, don't be silly. You're premenstrual. Of course you're going to be thinking like this. And then every time it was, no, this time it really is true. It's really true. And it's really funny when I look back at it now, funny, haha. But when I look back at it now, I recognize that is purely, well, there are lots of reasons. And when we start talking about how you can support yourself with this, um, you'll understand better. But if you're already in an emotionally depleted state, which a lot of women are when they're premenstrual, if you're already struggling with your emotionality, if you've already got examples of these things happening when you were a child. So I'm not saying that we haven't been rejected, because our behavior patterns sometimes, are actually exacerbated. So people, if we're explosive and fiery, people are going to reject us because they don't like explosive and fiery. If we retreat into ourselves and run away and are a bit withdrawn, people will criticize us for that as well. So we have had this history. So we are building on that history that we've had. But if we're in a better baseline state, we're less likely to move into it. And I know I can remember that this happened because it happened again and again and again and again. So I've got the repetition to remind me. But mostly I don't remember most of the big events unless I've built a narrative around it.
And something that you may have seen, I can't remember who came up with this idea, but if the idea of, like, here's your brain stem and this is your frontal cortex, your logic. When logic goes, you're literally in that, you're not going to be able to make, you are reacting, you are surviving. And we've got things like functional freeze then, when you're still operating, where you've got a whole load of disassociation going on, and where there's this fine line then into, like, being in a constant state of trauma. Because what I'm hearing with this, that the RSD, it's just, I'm just thinking about how complex it is, because we've got a separate episode where we're exploring PTSD and CPTSD. And then right at the end of the episode, we were going, what about RSD? And how does that then show up? And I said, so I wonder if you could speak to being in this, it's that functional freeze a little bit, and how raw it can feel for people where they're disassociating, and then the intensity of rejection on top of everything that you've described.
So it's really interesting, because I'm just thinking, my ADHD brain, I didn't answer your question about dysphoria and about your discomfort with the term dysphoria. So dysphoria actually dysphoria means unbearable,
Yeah.
which is why Dodson added it.
Okay.
But it's used in other mental health conditions which are really, really serious. So I know that a lot of people are really uncomfortable with the fact that he's introduced it, because it's a really serious mental health condition. And the idea about PTSD and CPTSD, CPTSD is repeated micro doses of trauma, basically. And if you think of attachment as being micro doses of trauma, if you see that, you know, we talk about attachment trauma, and what I was talking about was attachment related rejection sensitivity, then that is effective. I mean, people would classify it as CPTSD potentially, and you know, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not going to be classifying as that, but effectively, what you've got is these constant micro traumas that you're experiencing throughout. So yeah.
And I think what that has really flagged is the complexity of the mental health of neurodivergent individuals, really. So we've brought all of this stuff up to discuss, to understand what it is. And you've peppered our conversation very nicely with, and what can we do about it? How can we respond?
So first of all, it's really important to understand that it's nothing to be ashamed of. A lot of people who are rejection sensitive carry a really heavy dose of shame. Oh, I'm too needy. I'm ridiculous. Why can't I just get over it? And that can often lead to thoughts of hopelessness and what's the point of me? And I know that when I was premenstrual, it was always like, oh no, but it's really true this time. What's the point of me? Why, you know, why do I bother? Why would I feel like that? So if you see it instead as a pattern of your body that your body's learned, when I reach out to people, I get hurt. So I'm now cautious and jumpy about it. That makes sense, right? So nothing about this makes you broken. It tells you, in fact, what's really one way of looking at it, which I really like, is actually your system's just doing exactly what it should be doing. So you should be grateful to your system. You should say thank you so much. And there's a method of psychotherapy called internal family systems, where you actually go back and you thank your little self for protecting you. Thank you so much. I know you weren't getting the attention that you needed. I know you were being criticized for this, that, and the other. Thank you for creating all these ways of protecting yourself. Thank you, because it's not a fault. It's actually a strength. This is one of your strengths. And in fact, I use a system called PQ, which I can talk about a bit later, but which talks about your reactions to things being overuse of the strengths that you have. So so you're always trying to keep the peace by withdrawing because you don't want people to be arguing. It's because you're a peacekeeper, and that's a really beautiful thing to be. You know, it's a really nice way of reframing things that we see as negative rather than self-protective. So moving on to what we can do about it, I think there are various stages, but for me the most important thing is keeping yourself in a good baseline nervous system state. So if your baseline is already high, exhausted, overstimulated, underrested, it takes almost nothing to tip you into a threat response. So part of working with rejection sensitivity is the really boring stuff like getting enough sleep, eating food regularly, taking movement breaks, reducing digital input, total constant digital input. All the things that bring the volume down so you're not permanently on the edge. So if you think about it, there are ways that you can put micro regulation practices into place, and I'll come back to this again, but with the it sounds like I'm really overselling this, but with the PQ system, I found this is really, really helpful. With PQ it's positive intelligence. It's an app-based program which identifies clusters of behavior patterns that you have used over time to protect yourself, that sabotage the way that you function. So these are called your saboteurs. And what the system does is, in an app-based system, it helps you to put in place systems and processes to calm your nervous system, so that when something happens to you to trigger you, you are in a more calm, sage state to be able to respond to them, so that you're less likely to be reactive. So things like regular breathing work, So you'll have heard this, I imagine, on others of your podcast, but the suggestion that you take a deep breath in and you lengthen the out breath so it's really long. And simply by doing that, you'll hear that my voice has dropped, that my pace has slowed down, because obviously I'm slightly under pressure here because I'm talking about an area that makes me nervous. Rejection sensitivity. Of course, I have thoughts of rejection when I'm presenting myself on the subject. So just taking a moment to calm my nervous system and calm my system so that I'm less agitated, so that when something comes up, if you ask me a question that I don't know the answer to, I'm less likely to go like that and panic. So grounding in your body, you know, putting your feet on the floor, noticing the contact points. And that and I know with ADHD, some of these some of the sort of grounding techniques, the meditative practices are really, really, really hard. But there are ones that you can do that are more active. So when you go out for a walk, feeling your feet. Do you know what I always? I'm going to see if I can lift my leg high enough to show you. I wear barefoot shoes. And the reason I have to take one off because they're really nice. I wear barefoot shoes, right? So they're really soft and squishy and they've got really thin sole. If I go out in barefoot shoes, I can feel all the stones under my feet. I can feel the ground. I can feel the earth. And I can walk really slowly and really feel that. And I know that that's not what we always want when we've got ADHD, because we just want to be on the rush all the time, we're going the whole time. But actually, slowing yourself down and really noticing things can really help, really, really help.
Yeah.
Short pauses between tasks, especially social ones. So recognize what your social battery is. If you need time in between things, it's worth noticing whether social activities pick you up and make you really energetic, or if they drain you. And if they do, make sure that you're giving yourself plenty of time between them. And then having a safe person, so someone that you know calms your nervous system, someone who you can co-regulate with effectively, someone who's going to help make you feel safe. So if you don't know what co-regulation is, just think about it as a sense of safety. Who are the people in your life that don't make you go like this and be anxious? Who are the people in life that calm you down? And if that's dogs or animals or cats, then use them to co-regulate you. If there aren't safe people in your life, use a squishy. Use a squishy. And one thing that I really often do now, because I struggle with rejection sensitivity during the night, I hold a cushion. I cuddle a cushion, even when my partner's in the bed with me, because it gives me a real sense of safety, of being held. And being held is important, that sort of sense of being held. And for me, the anxiety in my tummy goes away when I cuddle a cushion. So it's about ensuring that you know how to keep your baseline state good to begin with.
And then you're making me think of weighted blankets immediately.
Absolutely. And do you know what? I don't have a weighted blanket. When I go to stay at my sister's house, her son has a weighted blanket, and I sleep under it, and it's like, oh, I should get one of these. I really should get one of these.
I'll put the link for the weighted blankets we have. I have one, and my kid has one. And apparently it's glass beads, and I hope that we wash them in the washing machine and they're all still functioning. But that is incredible way of just calming everything. And also, when I just think of me and my son, we want that on and we want to be alone with it. So it's interesting what you're saying about, even though you're with your partner, just having that, it's that self regulation. But there's also all sorts of things that you can do physiologically. And when I just reflect on the various things I've sort of stayed with over the years, we'll talk about the noise bit as well with that in a second, is something I started taking, the absolute Calogen, about 6 years ago. And it's the only thing that I've been persistent in taking. And what I found that helped me with was dry eyes and that awful anxiety. And I'll take it regularly and then I'll forget because I feel absolutely fine. And then the anxiety kind of builds up again. And it takes about a week of taking it again for it all to really settle down. So there's definitely physiological stuff, and there's all sorts of things that we can do that we find. I just think it's worth noticing. And we were talking earlier about coffee as well, and how I put cinnamon in my coffee,
Yeah.
cinnamon on my food, whatever. I don't know what it does physiologically, but I can tell you that I notice a calming effect with
and
it.
and and it doesn't even matter whether that's psychosomatic, and
Yeah.
I'm not, it's like the whole idea of the placebo is very effective, and I'm not saying that it is a placebo. I don't
Mm.
know because I haven't done research into it, but what I would say is observation of yourself is really important. And like you said, I I have this squishy that I was given, and when I play with it, it makes a noise and it resonates in a point in my head that feels slightly blissful. And it's really funny because unless you actually do these things and find out, you're never going to really know. So as a coach, you're making the subconscious conscious. You're trying to notice what works and what doesn't work. And so it's really important with this kind of thing. And there's a really, really good psychological practitioner called Linda Ty, who I love, and she does a lot of work on trauma, and um, and she's got a yoga practitioner in the background of, she's just amazing, and she has lots and lots of suggestions for how you can make yourself feel protected. One of them is, if you've got one of those pregnancy cushions that you haven't got rid of, if you're a mother, the pregnancy cushions that are that funny shape,
Mm.
she suggests putting it over your head because it gives you that sense of protection on the head. So you have it around your head and you snuggle it at night. So that's one of the suggestions that she has. She also does this thing with a scarf where you tie yourself into something, so you're actually tied up, and it gives that sense of swaddling from, like when you were little, being all crushed up and sort of. And in fact, just doing that, I realised giving yourself a hug. I know it sounds ridiculous to some people, but actually giving yourself a hug and going, "It's all right, you're okay." And if you think about the sounds that we sometimes play to a baby, or the noises that we make when a baby needs calming, and this is really funny. It's really calming me. That's why I'm not stopping hugging myself. Is that sort of shh. You say to a baby when it's upset, shh, 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 it's all right. And that really sort of, oh, it's okay. It's okay. And if you do that, say shh, and say, it's okay. Everything is all right. And just feel how that you sense that in your nervous system. Is that giving me calm, or is it irritating me? Because some people will be like, oh God, I can't hear that. Oh, what are you doing talking like that? And it'll irritate them. That's fine. But find what is comforting to you that will keep your nervous system at a calm state.
And you mentioned clothes very briefly, and it's a whole huge area that I am wanting to deep dive into at some point. Clothes, I think, is really important. And we've talked about weighted blankets. So, for example, really tight trousers and tops. It's not just the softness; it's the pressure that I feel, and the temperature. All of that is so important to me. It has to be just the right tight or just the right loose. And it's like Goldilocks and the three porridges, not too hot, not too cold. It has to be just right. And it's not the same all the time.
No, no.
Or there'll
And
be go-to trousers, and then it tips into, if I find a pair of trousers that I love, I'll have to have three exactly the same. There can't be different colors. They have to be three of exactly the same, because that creates a sense of safety and well-being walking
There
around.
it is, the safety. There's the safety again.
Yeah.
Our systems are wired to try and find a place of safety.
Yeah.
Constantly try and find a place of safety. It's interesting. In fact, that tightness thing that you were talking about in clothes, it's really interesting because for different people it'll be different things. And for
Absolutely.
me, a lot of my rejection is around my weight. And so anything that suggests to me that I've gained weight is going to be a trigger for it.
Mm.
And it's only recently how I've recognized how much that is. And it's really interesting because as a child I was sent to a I was sent to a dietitian. And if you think about it, a child reads, I've got to be sent to a doctor to be fixed. I am wrong. I am. And so going to a dietitian made me have that sense that actually there was something wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
So anything around the weight stuff for me. So if I step on the scale and the weight's gone up, it sends me straight into rejection sensitivity. I will be sensitive to all forms of rejection until I've done something about it. And
Mm-hmm.
we'll talk about what you can do when you actually have an event. I'm really It's really important. But I think one thing um, that I really like to point out to you is that there is some research that so researchers look at things like your blink or startle reflex to see how
Mm.
jumpy the body is, to get a sense of how tuned to threat someone's system is. Um, and the idea that if you're already in negative threatened state, your body jumps more to sudden noises or shocks. That maps quite nicely onto the rejection sensitivity. We're emotionally blink early and we can flinch at the hint of rejection, not just the obvious stuff. So the reason I point this out now is because we're talking about maintaining a healthy baseline. So if you think about what social media is all about, right? It's so there was this piece of research which I read, which I found fascinating. So they were trying to see whether people who were rejection sensitive, so they fulfilled the criteria of it on a by filling in a questionnaire. Um, they looked at images that were rejecting images. So there were rejecting images, there were violent images, there were all these different images in art. So they looked at them. They weren't really explicit, but people were looking rejected. If you see images of other people being rejected, your blink response increases if you are rejection sensitive, which means that you go on to hyper alert. So if you are looking at other people being rejected, then you are going to be more likely to have an attack. And if you think about what the implications are for social media, you have no control over what's coming through your feed. There might be images of war, of pain, and of other people suffering. If you're looking at other people suffering, you are more likely to see that rejection in the world around you. So I actually try to avoid social media completely. I find it really, really triggering. And if you think about it, social media wants to prompt a reaction in you. So it's actually making money out of the fact that you have this attachment trauma because you are more likely to react when it presents you with all these images of rejection, of pain, of and I think that's really important for people to recognize and to think, where am I being exposed to that? Because when I was a child, everybody used to really love Only Fools and Horses. You know Only Fools and Horses, the TV show. I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand it because I hated the way that they treated Rodney. Just saying it makes me feel really sad. And people say, "Oh yeah, but they were just being teasing." No, it was constant. He was constantly called a plonker, and I just couldn't watch it. It's the same with the Office and that constant putting people down. I just can't watch other people being bullied. If you think about watching other people being bullied and how it affects your nervous system so that you're more likely to have an attack, just think about your consumption of anything. What are you reading? What are you watching? What are you, what are you looking at on social media? is this really serving you, or is it just making you more likely to feel rejected?
I think this is also really important. It's not just about social media, though. The news. My godmother in the 80s would switch off the news. She said, I can't do anything. I'm near the end of my life. It's too much negativity. So she would actively not watch the news. And when my father died, when you're processing all of this grief, complex, many levels, I decided to stop watching the news because I remembered that was what my godmother had done. It doesn't mean you're not going to hear or see or be aware of the news, but my whole nervous system was on overload already. And this was before social media, I think before even Facebook really had taken, it was, yeah, I think Facebook was after my dad had died. Certainly LinkedIn, I can't remember, but it was pre everyone being on social media. So world news and the news would overload my system. And taking that bit out, I noticed very quickly things calming down. And watching the news or making that decision makes the assumption that you are not aware of global geopolitics, your neighborhood, and all the rest of it. And that's simply not true. I don't know how, but it's just around you all the time. What is going on in the world? It's just there. I can't explain it. The way the conversations people have, the news on the radio. I've got classic FM going all the time to keep the calm in the home with all the animals. So I get sound pockets. But I don't actively. I have many. I was at a dinner party a few months ago, quite a number of months ago, and it was really interesting how the conversation went. The first thing that I think everybody around the table did when they woke up was to reach for the phone to see what's happening in the world. So they were all starting the day at a heightened level of anxiety, all of them. And I had the sort of luxury, I guess, of having made that decision a very long time ago, not to start the day with the world's problems or news. And I still active and that was incredibly empowering. And I've maintained that practice for nearly 2 decades, I think, probably, of this is how I'm going to start my day. It's like a jet plane taking off. And I need that space intellectually. When my brain comes online, it's really fast. And I think if when I woke up, the first thing I would do, scanning the world for threat with an RSD kind of response, it just tipped me. And around that table were many different people. There weren't all neurodivergent people. It's sprinkled with neurodivergent people, but everybody would reach for the world news because people are reaching to know whether they're safe or not. And the whole and but for me, that was a really easy way to not start the day like that. It helped me in a time of grief to have a bit of space. And like when we were talking about coffee and whether we drink coffee or not, or whether we eat chocolate or not before we started recording, about observing your own response to stuff. And this is where I feel is what we're saying, making the subconscious conscious. What works for you to improve your baseline, but you get to choose.
And it's funny, Diana, because you've said that, and actually I decided to do that more recently once I'd done all the research into this. So I don't, and I have this sort of sense of guilt around it, that that I'm not aware, because people see it as an absolute necessity to know what's going on. And I do think that that's really important. And I am aware of what's happening in the world generally. And what I do is, one of the things is that, you know, if it's outside my sphere of influence and there's nothing I can do about it, knowing about it isn't going to help anybody. I've done lots of volunteering work for years and years, and I remember one time when we were in a particularly difficult situation. I was the chair of a local community association, and there was some conflict going on, and I said, because I have a lot of energy, a lot of positive energy, and what was happening was that the negativity of that response from the people who we were in conflict with, was dampening my ability to do the positive stuff. And so I made an active decision. In fact, I was very fortunate. One of my neighbours said, "Look, I'll be a go-between between you and them. I will take all the crap from them, and you can keep going and using your energy in a positive way." And so that's an example. But more recently, I've also stopped consuming news. So what I now do is I volunteer in my local community. I run a women's group, where I bring together this sort of this. It's a safe space. It's a space of safety where women share experience and pain and suffering, but they share together and they support one another. And so what I do is I try to ensure that I'm living a way that I would want the world to be, but without having too much input from the outside world and all its traumas, so that I'm, hopefully helping others to be more resilient, so that when the shit does hit the fan, they're in a more resilient position because they've got a sense of safety. They know there's a safe place to go. So I do quite a lot of volunteering work locally, and that for me means that I'm addressing the issues that I know are big globally. So I work with refugees, for example, because I know that there's a lot of unpleasantness coming from people who don't recognize the difficulty of the journey that they've made, and that actually we're just all very fortunate that we happen to be born where we were born, and we didn't happen to be in a place where conflict came about, so I just think if I can do that, if I can support people locally, and obviously supporting my clients as well, then I don't need to have, like you said, like having that on tap the whole time, all that stress of other people's trauma. And one of the things that came up in one of my recent women's groups was that a friend of mine who's my accountant writes poetry in her spare time, and she came to present her poetry a couple of weeks ago, and it's just fabulous. And there is one poem, and I would love to have it with me so that I could quote it. That's why I've been looking on my shelves. Sorry for my distractedness, because I've been looking on my shelves to see if I've got her book, and I don't think I've got it in here. So, but there's this wonderful poem which basically says that the express train coming through of tragedy isn't for me this time. So I'm going to step back, and I'm not going to pick over the bones of others, so that I have the capacity when my time does come. And she puts it so beautifully, with this
Maybe
of a train.
maybe we could put the actual poem in the show notes if
I'll have to check with
after.
Tori.
Yeah.
Her name's Tori Wag. I'll have to check with Tori to see whether that's okay. But I imagine it would be. I mean, she would. I'm sure she'd be delighted. But I love it. It's sort of saying, yes, all this panic is out there in the world, but actually my job is to protect the people I love around me. And when it comes up, that's when we suffer. That's when we're really allowed to suffer. Let's not just constantly suffer for things that we can't do anything about. And if we can do something about it, do something about it.
Now, you mentioned about what to do when an episode.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So when I'm properly flooded, I don't ask myself to be calm straight away. First, I need to help the stress move through. So I'm going to walk or dance or shake, or there's a tense release exercise, which I can kind of give you an example of. And then I can breathe and think. So if you think about this, you are in a threat response. Your body is rushing with cortisol and adrenaline. So you have to find some way to get that out. So first of all, notice it and go, oh, I'm having a rejection episode. Oh, because that effectively takes you a step away from it. It means that you're not so much in it, you're observing it from externally, and that can really help reduce its potency. So my system thinks I'm about to be dropped or shamed. If you just name it, that's a really big part of it. And then you think about moving the stress chemistry out of your body. So moving that stress out of your body. So you might want to put a favourite tune on. And I know this sounds ridiculous and it's not always possible, but put a favourite tune on and dance. Go for a brisk walk. Do some star jumps. Shake out your arms. Or anything that gives the adrenaline somewhere to go. This one is good. So if you're in a social situation, you need something subtler. You can do a tense release thing. So you tighten your muscles, all your muscles in your body for a few seconds, count maybe to 3 or 4. I need to be careful not to do it for too long, because when I'm tense, I forget to breathe. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I've got to breathe too. So you're really, really tense. You tense your tummy, you tense your shoulders, you tense everything, you tense. And then you release, and you actually can feel the lightening. So that's really helpful. So the idea is to help your body come down from the fight, flight reaction, essentially. So you've removed some or all of the cortisol out of your system, the adrenaline. You need to pause. Don't respond instantly to it, because your frontal cortex, remember, your frontal cortex goes offline when you go into a threat response. Not completely offline, but your ability to think logically reduces dramatically. So don't send any big texts, don't send any emails, or make any life decisions while your body is in a threat state. Just don't do it. Put the phone down, step away from the laptop. If you've got an email where you feel like you've been rejected, don't answer it instantly. Don't answer it instantly. Go. I know. I remember my sister saying once, when I was in a threat response, she said, "Go and shove your face in a bowl of cold water." And one of the methods that they suggest for children who are really, really hyperactive at night time is that you give them ice to hold. So if they're holding ice in their hands, it brings them instantly into their body. I sometimes put ice on my neck, which helps me calm myself. So you've got notice, move from the stress chemistry. So find a way, jump, run, ice, whatever it happens to be that you can do to stop yourself from feeling that. The tense release one is the easiest one if you're in a social situation. Pause, don't make any big decisions, don't do anything instantly, and then regulate your body. So once you've calmed, you've removed the stress, let's bring yourself back into a better baseline position, because you've got rid of that stuff, but you really do need to. So 2 or 3 minutes of slow breathing. You can do box breathing. Do you know about box breathing, where you count 1, 2, 3, 4 in, 1, 2, 3, 4 of the hold, 1, 2, 3, 4 out, 1, 2, 3, 4 hold. So you're basically breathing in a box. Grounding. Look around the room and name what you can see, hear, and feel. It sounds ridiculous, but it's as easy as that. I can see I can see the plant that I've got here. Oh, and my lovely, beautiful picture of this, or my cute little squishy. You're taking yourself out of the situation. It's almost like a distracting technique, like you would with a kid. Cold water, like we said, on the wrists or the face, if that helps. And then once you are in a calm nervous system, you can start working on the story. You can check the story. What else could this mean? Have I misread this? How many times with ADHD have you read something and assumed it says one thing, and then come back to it and it says another? I mean, I was coaching someone recently, and she was absolutely adamant that she hadn't been provided with a whole load of information. She sent me the email that she'd received. I read the email and I said, let's have a look at these. Is the information in this thing? And it was like, oh yeah, I've got all the information I need. But she didn't see that. All she saw was the criticism. So it's, what else could this mean? Have I misinterpreted it? If you're safe, seek clarification.
Mm-hmm.
So you might talk to someone and say, when you said this, I felt a bit knocked. Can you tell me how you meant it? And if you're a people pleaser or you're avoidant, which is very common with ADHD, very common with ADHD, that you avoid things because you can't cope with them emotionally, it's difficult. It's really difficult. But it's also really important to be, to check and to see, because I know every time I would do this when I was in my ruminating, I told you about it, I would go, so and so doesn't like me, so and so doesn't like me, oh no, oh, I'm useless, nobody likes me, everyone hates me. And then I go, oh no, but it's not true, you're just premenstrual. And then I go, no, but it's true this time. I'm still in that threat response, so I'm still going to be ruminating. So you really do need to calm yourself before you can look at this logically. And then repair with yourself. Of course that hurts. The reason it hurts because relationships matter to me. Because I care about that person. It hurts. And acknowledging that it hurts and just go, gosh, that's sad. Just acknowledging it. And be curious. Don't punish yourself. What did I actually need there? How could I support myself better next time?
There's so many bits of gold there that's going to be helpful, and it's just try it. You just try. The bit that comes to mind, once you have the information, that awareness, because it can feel so instant, that response to something, can't it? To catch yourself before you start that thought process, and being able to, or I think you just learn, don't you? The first time you might not catch, but the second, just try, just keep trying would be the big thing. Because I would say, if you're listening to this episode now, that things have resonated, that things make a bit more sense, and you've been trying, it's almost like, as children, we learn by playing. We just learn by trying different things. So just like with the breath thing, if I can feel stuff bubbling or rising, whatever, I just hold my breath. That's my version of tensing. Just hold until it sort of calms and then release. It's just sort of, I know the word playing might seem like the wrong word, but just trying all of these things that you've just said, and see what works for you, because it's your body, your mind, and you get to figure out ways of doing things. Like, so the observing thing, I find that really hard if it's tipped too far, if it's gone too far. So then I guess it might well be back to the tensing, but the bare feet on the ground, just walking around the house, I need bare feet. That really grounds me in the summer. So that will, because I'm not having to think about it. And then the conscious bit about, oh yeah, noticing my bare feet. It's just playing with different modalities and having options in your toolkit. I think counselors, therapists, and coaches, you've got a kit. You pull it out for whatever and try.
I think you're absolutely right. It's about finding the best methods that work for you, but also for me, the key thing is recognizing it for what it is, and not feeling shame about it, because actually your body's just doing what it millennia of evolution has made our systems do anyway, right? So this is just your body keeping you safe. And okay, let's think about it. Okay, so when my body's trying to feel safe, it jumps into this threat mode. How do I get myself out of this threat mode before I start trying to think? Because I'm not going to be able to think properly when I'm in threat mode.
Yeah. Just be it's okay, you're human, and we have threat responses because it's part of being human. Some we've mentioned all sorts of people like that have been really helpful and influential. And when you were talking about the shaking mode, it's probably worth mentioning Peter Levine and Walking with a Tiger. That will come up quite often, and his observation about animals are literally living with the threat responses, and they're not all walking around with obvious signs of trauma. It's part of survival, and the shaking out.
But
So
isn't it interesting, in keeping with the title of your podcast, that, you know, I should confess that even the dog has rejection sensitivity story.
yeah.
Yeah, so we're all mammals. Our brains are built on the same basic wiring. So when a dog feels shut out of the pack, you see the same kind of threat response that I'm talking about in humans, don't you? So if a dog's pushed out of the pack, shut out of the room, ignored for long periods, or has got a traumatic background, it'll have a traumatic background. You only notice when they're in trouble. You'll see pacing, whining, chewing, like you said, that lovely shaking response, all sorts of bad behavior that's just the nervous system saying, I don't feel safe. So, you know, it's like we're not that different. We have our own sense of inner pack, you know, and when our sense of inner pack is feeling shaky, we don't feel secure inside ourselves.
So some of the things, the sort of the takeaways that maybe we can look at, that we've got this note here about it not just being ADHD, that it's something that it's experienced across various mental health, well-being, all of that conditions. Shame is the sort of almost the catalyst to petrol on fire, make things worse. And that this is not a system that's broken. This is a system that is in overdrive. You mentioned the lovely internal family systems, IFS, if people are aware of that. We'll put links to books. I can't remember the author just now. And then you've mentioned fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and really importantly, flop. And we've explored some of that. And the way, as you're listening to this episode, as you're raising your awareness, some of the things that you can do proactively to sort of almost improve your baseline level, so that it doesn't feel like the straw that breaks the camel's back moment.
Nice metaphor.
Yeah, that I think people are quite familiar with that. It's the final thing. And then when you're experiencing an episode, learning to be aware that that's coming. Sometimes you might miss it, but what you can do, you've given some ideas of what you can do to regulate, to get back to that sense. So if we think of flipping the lid, and we're just in this raw emotional response, you gave some ideas about how you bring yourself back into yourself. You've also mentioned PQ as a method. Catch your story. And it was an app that you mentioned.
Oh yeah. So it's a kind of coaching app, and I use it in conjunction with my coaching. So it's a way of noticing the saboteur voice in your head, the inner critic, the people pleaser, the victim, and strengthening the different kind of wiser part of you. So it gives you simple mental reps to come back to a calmer state, and makes your choices, and it helps you with some of the sabotaging behavior, so like the avoidance and the hypercritical and the hypervigilant and all these various different behavior patterns. It provides you with a structured presence in between my coaching sessions. So what I do is I use it as a tool so that people have those with them all the time. And it's also really helpful in terms of ADHD because it uses habit stacking to help people build habits, which I really like as a sort of teaching method to help people, because we often struggle with habit stacking. So yeah, you can get the positive, it's PQ, positive intelligence. You can get the app on your own from their website, or you can do it in conjunction with a coach. And I would suggest that you do that because you're going to get a lot more out of it if you do. But
Yeah.
I also run a group course. Am I allowed to tell
Yeah,
you about
of
that?
course.
So, yeah, I'm running a group course where we practice all of this stuff together, where we notice the patterns and we work with the body and we build we're building kinder inner voices. And I have a short introductory session so people can see if it's for them before they commit.
And we'll put all the links in with the show notes to be able to reach out.
Lovely.
So as we close out, are there any final words of wisdom that you want to share, Stella?
I think probably the message, and this is really interesting, when I write about this and people give me comments, I think the most important thing is for people to recognize that actually it's not a character flaw, it's just a totally natural way that your body is responding to a sense of lack of safety. So don't feel guilty about it, recognize that it's a threat response, and provide yourself with find systems and processes that help to calm your nervous system and keep you in a better baseline state. And then when that happens, find ways to get yourself out of the cortisol and adrenaline response. Because when you're in that state, you're like this and you can't possibly make any logical decisions. So leave the logical and the thinking until your brain is actually working and it can actually think properly.
Thank you. If there's one thing that I hope you take from today, is that when you feel that instant dread after a text message is sent, that is not a character flaw, that it is your nervous system doing exactly what it needs to do. And if any of the episode today has brought up old memories that you'd rather not remember or anything like that, please be gentle with yourself. Please be kind to yourself. And a huge thanks to Stella for her openness and honesty and all the different strategies that she's shared with us, which I hope you will find some to help support you. And remember, there's all sorts of resources associated with this episode on eventhedoghasadhd.com, as well as in the show notes. So please remember to like, comment, share and subscribe, because it all really helps to get this conversation to a wider audience of people that may find it really helpful. So before I close out, remember, apples don't fall far from trees, and there is never just one.